I thought getting caught would ruin everything. But the way my best friend's mom looked at me that night made me realize she'd been hiding the same feelings too. I've been going to my best friend Ryan's house for so many years that it stopped feeling like someone else's home a long time ago. Even before college ended and life started pulling everyone in different directions, his place always felt steady in a way mine never really did. The house carried this quiet warmth to it. Soft yellow light in the evenings, old wooden floors that creaked gently near the stairs, the smell of coffee and clean laundry drifting from the kitchen almost every afternoon. And somehow, his mom was at the center of all of it. Claire had this calm presence that made people relax without even noticing it. She wasn't loud or overly outgoing. She just listened when people talked. Really listened. Even when Ryan rushed through stories or complained about work, she'd lean lightly against the kitchen counter with her mug in both hands, nodding softly like every word mattered. I noticed little things about her that other people probably missed. The way she tucked loose strands of chestnut brown hair behind her ear when she was tired. The way her eyes lingered out the window for an extra second after certain phone calls. The small sigh she let out when she thought nobody was paying attention. She smiled often, but sometimes it felt like the smile arrived a second later than it used to. And I hated that I noticed that. Maybe that was why the sketches started. At first, it was harmless. I drew people sometimes when I couldn't sleep. Faces from coffee shops. Strangers on trains. Ryan making dumb expressions while gaming. But eventually, pages of my sketchbook started filling with her instead. Claire, standing barefoot in the kitchen, holding a coffee mug. Claire laughing with sunlight across her face. Claire sitting on the back porch wrapped in a cardigan while rain blurred the windows behind her. I never planned for it to become something important. But somewhere along the way, those drawings stopped being casual sketches and started becoming proof of feelings I didn't know what to do with. So I hid them. Every time I came over, the sketchbook stayed buried at the bottom of my backpack beneath hoodies and notebooks like that somehow made it less real. That afternoon, Ryan had left to grab food while I stayed behind upstairs in his room, pretending to scroll through my phone. My backpack sat open beside the bed, the zipper half undone because I've been searching for my charger. Downstairs, I could hear Claire moving around the kitchen. Cabinet doors opening. Soft music playing faintly from a speaker. The familiar rhythm of her humming under her breath. For some reason, hearing it made my chest tighten. Then footsteps started up the stairs. I glanced toward the door, just as Ryan's dog pushed into the room ahead of her, tail wagging wildly. The dog jumped against the side of the bed hard enough to shake my backpack. And suddenly, my sketchbook slid free. It hit the floor with a sharp smack. My stomach dropped instantly. The book opened on impact, right to a page with her face on it. I moved too late. Claire stepped into the doorway at the exact moment the color drained from my face. For one frozen second, neither of us moved. Then her eyes lowered to the sketchbook on the floor. The room went completely still. I stared at the sketchbook on the floor like if I looked hard enough, maybe the universe would rewind the last 5 seconds and save me from the humiliation crawling up my neck. But it was too late. Claire bent down before I could even move. "Wait," I started, but the word came out weak and breathless. Her fingers closed gently around the edge of the sketchbook, lifting it from the hardwood floor with careful hands. Not rushed, not angry, just curious. My pulse slammed against my ribs, so hard it almost hurt. She looked down at the open page first. It was one of the more detailed sketches. Her sitting near the kitchen window during a rainy afternoon, wrapped in that oversized cream cardigan she always wore when she couldn't sleep. I'd spent hours trying to capture the softness in her expression, the loneliness she tried so hard to hide from everyone else. I wish the floor would swallow me whole. "I can explain," I said quickly, though I had absolutely no idea how. Claire didn't answer right away. She slowly turned another page, then another. Every sketch was her. Different days, different expressions, tiny moments I didn't even realize I'd memorized until I drew them. My hands clenched at my sides. I know it looks weird. That finally made her glance up at me. And instead of shock or disgust, she smiled. Small, quiet, almost disbelieving. The tension in my chest faltered for a second, because that was the last reaction I expected. "You drew all these?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard and nodded. The afternoon sunlight coming through the window caught the edges of her hair, turning parts of it gold. She stood only a few feet away from me, close enough that I could smell the faint mix of vanilla perfume and fresh laundry on her clothes. I couldn't even look at her properly anymore. "I am sorry, imatert. I never meant for you to see them." She looked back down at the page again, studying it more carefully this time. Her expression changed. Not embarrassed, not uncomfortable. Something quieter than that. Almost emotional. "You really see me like this?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. My eyes lifted to hers automatically. "What?" "These drawings," she said gently, her thumb brushing the corner of one page. "You notice things most people don't." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because the truth was, I did notice her. All the time. The way she smiled at everyone before herself. The exhaustion she carried behind her posture sometimes. The loneliness hidden underneath all her composure. "You always take care of everybody else," I admitted quietly. "I guess I just started wondering who takes care of you." The words hung between us. Claire went still. For the first time since she walked in, her confident composure seemed to crack just slightly around the edges. Her eyes softened in a way that made my chest ache. No one spoke for several long seconds. Outside, I could hear wind rustling through the trees and the distant bark of Ryan's dog downstairs. But inside the room, everything felt strangely suspended. Then, slowly, she sat down beside me on the edge of the bed, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. I froze instantly. She held the sketchbook loosely in her lap, looking down at one of the pages again before speaking. "I haven't felt noticed in a very long time," she said quietly. There was no self-pity in her voice. That somehow made it worse. I looked over at her carefully. Up close, I could see the faint tiredness beneath her eyes, the tiny lines that appeared when she smiled too much during the day. She let out a soft breath and finally turned toward me. "You weren't supposed to make me emotional over a sketchbook," she murmured with a faint laugh. The sound loosened something tight in my chest. I laughed too, nervous and shaky, and neither of us moved away. After that afternoon, something between us changed. Not all at once. Nothing dramatic. No sudden confessions or reckless moments that crossed lines too quickly. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. Because once you realize that someone sees you differently, it becomes impossible not to notice every little thing afterward. Especially when they start noticing you back. Over the next few days, Claire began finding reasons to keep me around longer. Small excuses that sounded casual enough to ignore if I wanted to pretend they meant nothing. Ryan would leave for work, and she'd ask if I wanted to stay for dinner since there's too much pasta anyway. When movies ended, she lingered beside me on the couch instead of immediately getting up to clean. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me during conversations, and when our eyes met, she'd glance away a second too late. That hesitation started getting to me. One night, a thunderstorm rolled through just after sunset. The rain came hard against the windows, thick drops rattling the glass, while distant thunder shook through the house. Ryan had gone out with co-workers, leaving just the two of us alone downstairs when the power flickered unexpectedly. Then everything went dark. Claire laughed softly from the kitchen. "Well, that's reassuring." A few minutes later, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table with candles burning between us. Warm amber light danced across the room, softening everything around her. The curve of her tired smile, the loose strands of hair falling around her face, the cardigan pulled tightly around her shoulders. Outside, rain poured endlessly against the roof. Inside, the silence felt strangely intimate. "You know," she said eventually, tracing one finger around the rim of her tea mug, "I used to love storms." I looked up. "Used to?" She gave a small shrug. "Things feel louder when you're alone." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. Claire usually carried herself with this effortless composure, like she'd mastered the art of never letting people see too much. But tonight, sitting in candlelight with exhaustion written softly across her features, she looked less guarded than I'd ever seen her. "My marriage kind of trained me to be independent," she admitted quietly. "After the divorce, I think I just stayed in survival mode. I listened carefully, afraid to interrupt. She smiled faintly, though it didn't fully reach her eyes. You spend so much time being the responsible one for everybody else that eventually you forget what it feels like to lean on someone. Something tightened painfully in my chest, because suddenly all the little things I noticed about her made sense. The late-night pacing, the forced smiles after stressful phone calls, the loneliness hidden underneath her calmness. Without thinking, I reached across the table slowly, resting my hand near hers. Not demanding, just there. For a second, she stared at it. Then her fingers slipped gently into mine. The contact sent warmth rushing straight through me. Her hand was soft and slightly cool from holding the mug, but the way she held onto me felt careful, almost hesitant, like she wasn't used to allowing herself comfort anymore. Neither of us spoke. The thunder outside filled the silence instead. Then her thumb brushed once against the side of my hand. A tiny movement, barely anything. But my heartbeat stumbled so hard it felt impossible she couldn't hear it. I looked up instinctively. Claire already seemed to realize what she'd done because her expression shifted slightly. Surprise mixed with something quieter. Something vulnerable. Still, she didn't pull away. The candlelight flickered between us while rain continued spilling against the windows, wrapping the house in this cocoon of warmth and noise and closeness. And sitting there with her hand in mine, I realized the real danger wasn't whether our connection was growing. It was that neither of us seemed willing to stop it anymore. The strange thing about crossing emotional lines is that sometimes nothing actually happens. No dramatic moment. No confession. No kiss. And yet somehow, everything changes anyway. After the stormy night in the kitchen, being around Claire started feeling different in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Every glance lasted a little longer. Every quiet moment carried weight behind it, which also meant every small shift hurt more than it should have. At first, Ryan noticed nothing. Why would he? To him, I was still the same friend who'd been hanging around his house for years. We still played video games in his room, still ordered cheap takeout, still argued over movies like always. But one Friday evening, while we were cleaning up empty soda cans after a game night, he smirked at me casually. "You spend more time here than I do now," he joked. "Pretty sure my mom likes you more than me at this point." My stomach tightened instantly. The comment was harmless, but the silence that followed wasn't. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway, automatically. Claire stood there, drying dishes with a towel in her hands. And for the first time since all this started, she looked uncomfortable. Not obvious enough for Ryan to catch, but I saw it immediately. The tiny hesitation in her movements, the way she avoided looking directly at me. The forced little laugh she gave before changing the subject too quickly. That was the beginning of her pulling away. At first, I told myself I imagined it. But then the small things started adding up. She stopped sitting beside me during movies, choosing the armchair across the room instead. Conversations became shorter, safer. Whenever our hands almost brushed while passing plates or coffee mugs, she pulled back too fast now, like even accidental contact scared her. And the hardest part, she still looked at me sometimes when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like she missed whatever this was too. One afternoon, I came over while Ryan was at work, mostly out of habit. Claire opened the door with a polite smile, but it wasn't the same smile anymore. Careful, measured. "Hey," she said softly. "Ryan's not home yet." "I know," I answered. For a second, neither of us moved. Usually she would have invited me inside immediately, asked if I wanted coffee, told me about her day. Instead, there was this awkward distance between us that felt unbearably wrong. Still, she stepped aside quietly to let me in. The house felt different too. Too quiet. I noticed there wasn't a mug waiting beside the coffee machine like there usually was when I visited. No soft music playing in the background. No easy conversation filling the space. Just silence. That evening, after Ryan left to meet friends downtown, I found Claire outside alone on the back patio. The night air carried the cool scent of rain-soaked grass. Crickets hummed softly beyond the fence while warm porch lights painted gold across the edges of her face. She sat curled slightly into herself on the outdoor chair, cardigan sleeves pulled over part of her hand. Claire looked up at me then, and the vulnerability in her expression nearly unraveled me. "No," she whispered. "That's the problem." The porch light caught the shine in her eyes as she let out a slow breath. "What scares me," she admitted quietly, "is how easy being close to you feels." Every sound around us suddenly faded into the background. I took another small step toward her before stopping myself. My chest felt unbearably tight. Claire looked up at me with this fragile honesty I'd never seen from her before, and for the first time, it felt like we were both standing at the edge of something neither of us fully knew how to survive. After our conversation on the patio, things between Claire and me became quieter. Not distant, just careful, like we both understood something important had finally been spoken out loud, and now neither of us knew exactly what came next. But no matter how hard she tried to rebuild those boundaries, I could still see the exhaustion settling deeper into her. She carried everything alone, and I was starting to realize how heavy that loneliness really was. A few nights later, Ryan texted me saying he'd be staying over at a friend's place after a concert downtown. I was already halfway home from work when I remembered I'd left my jacket at their house earlier that week. It was late when I pulled into the driveway. Most of the lights were off, except for the soft glow coming from the kitchen window. I knocked once before letting myself in quietly. "Claire," I called gently. No answer, but then I heard the faint scrape of a chair from the kitchen. When I walked in, my chest tightened immediately. She sat alone at the table in the dim light above the stove, one hand wrapped loosely around a mug that had long gone cold. Her hair was slightly messy, falling around her shoulders like she'd spent hours running her fingers through it. She wasn't dressed the way she normally was when people came over either, just soft lounge clothes and bare feet tucked beneath the chair. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly tired. Not physically, emotionally. Her eyes lifted toward me, glossy and red around the edges. "Oh," she said softly, clearly trying to compose herself. "I didn't know you were coming by." Something in her voice made me step closer immediately. "Are you okay?" That question almost broke her. She laughed once under her breath, but it sounded fragile. "Yeah, just long night." I noticed her phone sitting face down beside the mug. Then the expression she tried too hard to hide. "Was it your ex?" I asked carefully. She nodded faintly. "That obvious." I pulled out the chair beside her slowly instead of standing over her. It felt important somehow, meeting her at eye level instead of making her feel cornered in her vulnerability. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us while rain tapped lightly against the windows outside. The whole kitchen felt wrapped in exhaustion and silence. Then Claire finally exhaled shakily. "He forgot my birthday again," she admitted quietly. The words hit me harder than they should have. Not because of the ex-husband himself, because of the way she said it. Like disappointment had become something she expected. I looked at her carefully, at the woman who spent so much of her life making everyone else feel valued while accepting scraps of affection for herself. Without thinking too much about it, I reached up slowly and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The movement was gentle enough that she could have pulled away easily. She didn't. Instead, her eyes closed briefly at the touch. And then suddenly, like she was too exhausted to hold herself together anymore, she leaned forward until her forehead rested lightly against my shoulder. The contact felt heartbreakingly small, but the trust behind it felt enormous. My arms wrapped around her carefully, instinctively, holding her softly around the waist while she stayed close to me in the quiet kitchen. I could feel her breathing unevenly against me at first, then slowly calming. Her hands slid weakly against the front of my shirt, not clinging tightly, just needing something steady to hold on to for a minute. And for the first time, Claire let herself be comforted instead of pretending she didn't need it. I rested my cheek lightly against her hair, breathing in the faint scent of vanilla and shampoo while the rain continued outside. Neither of us rushed the moment. Neither of us wanted to. When she finally pulled back slightly, her eyes searched mine with this raw softness that made my chest ache. Then her fingertips lifted carefully to my jaw. They lingered there, not accidental, not uncertain, and somehow, that felt even more intimate than a kiss would have. After the night in the kitchen, pretending became impossible. Not because Claire and I suddenly acted differently around other people. If anything, we became even more careful, more aware of every glance, every pause, every moment that lasted a second too long. But once you've held someone while they quietly fall apart in your arms, something changes. You stop being able to lie to yourself about what they mean to you. And I knew I was already too far gone. A week later, Ryan's family hosted a small backyard barbecue for a few relatives and neighbors. The entire afternoon felt warm and noisy. Music drifting from speakers near the patio, people laughing over each other, the smell of grilled food hanging in the summer air. Claire moved through the crowd effortlessly like she always did, smiling, hosting, checking on everyone before herself. But every now and then, our eyes met across the yard, and every single time my chest tightened, because now I knew what her silence felt like when nobody else was around. By the time the night finally wound down, the house had gone quiet. Ryan left with friends to continue the night somewhere downtown, and the relatives slowly filtered out one by one until only soft music and the hum of crickets remained. I stayed behind to help clean up, or maybe because neither of us wanted me to leave yet. The kitchen windows were open to let cooler air inside. Warm wind drifted through the curtains while Claire stood beside the sink rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled to her elbows. I dried plates beside her in comfortable silence for a while, until she suddenly spoke. "You're very hard to stay away from." The plate nearly slipped from my hands. I looked over at her slowly. She wasn't looking at me yet, just drying her hands carefully with a towel, like the conversation terrified her. My heartbeat started climbing instantly. "Claire," she finally turned then, and the expression on her face unraveled me completely. "No was. No pretending. Just honesty." "I tried," she admitted softly. "After the patio, after everything. I kept telling myself this would pass if I just gave it enough distance." I stepped closer without even realizing it. "But it didn't," she whispered. The room suddenly felt very small. The music from the other room sounded distant now, muffled beneath the pounding in my chest. I stared at her for a long second before finally saying the thing I'd been holding back for weeks. "I don't just care about you when things are hard." Her breath caught slightly. I swallowed once, forcing myself to keep going. "I think about you all the time." Silence. Not awkward silence. The kind that changes everything. Claire's eyes searched mine carefully, almost like she was making sure I truly meant it. Then slowly, so slowly it nearly drove me insane, she stepped toward me. Her hand lifted carefully until it rested flat against the center of my chest, right over my heartbeat. The touch felt impossibly gentle. I covered her hand with mine instinctively, holding it there while we stood inches apart in the warm kitchen light. For a second, neither of us moved. Then our foreheads rested together first. That mattered. More than passion, more than urgency. It felt like relief. Like both of us were finally putting down something heavy we'd carried alone for too long. Claire let out the smallest, nervous laugh against me, and the sound made me smile automatically. Then finally, carefully, she kissed me. Soft, hesitant, warm enough to steal every coherent thought from my head. There was nothing rushed about it. No dos pedastion. Just months of unspoken feelings finally finding somewhere to exist. Her fingers curled lightly against my shirt while my hand settled carefully at her waist, holding her gently, like I was still afraid this might disappear if I moved too fast. When we pulled apart, she stayed close enough that our noses still brushed. And then she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Not the tired one she used to hide behind. This one was smaller, realer. The kind of smile that only appears when someone finally stops pretending they don't want to be loved. The strange thing was, once Claire and I finally stopped hiding from our feelings, everything else became easier with time. Not instantly. There were awkward conversations, careful explanations. A few people who looked at us with quiet judgment they tried not to say out loud. Ryan struggled with it at first too. I understood why. No matter how genuine something feels to the people inside it, the outside world only sees pieces of the story. They don't see the quiet nights, the emotional loneliness, the way two people slowly become home to each other without meaning to. What mattered was that we handled it honestly, patiently, and eventually, even Ryan realized something important. I wasn't taking advantage of his mother, and Claire wasn't lost or confused. We had simply found each other at the right moment in both our lives. Months passed, then more, and somewhere during that time, our relationship stopped feeling fragile. It started feeling natural, comfortable, real. I noticed it most in the smallest moments. Saturday mornings became slow and familiar, sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows while Claire stood beside the stove in oversized sweaters making coffee. Sometimes I'd walk up behind her quietly, sliding my arms gently around her waist while she leaned back against my chest without hesitation. "Careful," she'd murmur softly, smiling as she stirred cream into her mug. "You're distracting me." But she never moved away. At night, we'd fall asleep together on the couch halfway through movies, tangled beneath blankets while rain tapped softly against the windows. Sometimes she rested with her head against my chest, fingers tracing absent-minded circles along my wrist while I played with the ends of her hair. Those tiny touches became our language, wordless reminders that neither of us had to carry life alone anymore. And Claire changed too. Not completely. She still worried too much, still tried to take care of everyone before herself sometimes. But now she laughed more freely. The guarded sadness I used to catch in her eyes began disappearing little by little, replaced by something softer, lighter. Peace, maybe. One evening near the end of summer, we hosted a small family dinner at the house. Nothing fancy, just grilled food, music playing quietly outside, and too many people talking over one another. I caught myself watching Claire from across the backyard at one point while she laughed at something her sister said. The sunset painted warm gold across her skin, and for a second, I remembered the woman from my sketches, beautiful, lonely, carrying the weight of entire rooms on her shoulders while nobody noticed she was tired. Only now she didn't look lonely anymore. Later that night, after everyone left and the dishes were stacked inside, we sat together on the front porch in comfortable silence. The air,